It's the amazing Rico Brogna Podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Our break edition of Rico Brogna. Thank you very much for listening, downloading, subscribing, watching, whatever the hell you're doing with this edition of Rico Brogna. Obviously, we are in the midst of the All-Star break. If you missed it, we gave you a podcast recapping the 10 worst losses of the first half of the season. We are not always negative. That was a negative edition. Now we give you the positive. Today's edition of Rico Brogna would be the 10 best wins of the first half of the season. And we will follow that same path. We'll go in chronological order from the beginning of the season to now. And then after we recap all of them, we can kind of come to a conclusion on, hey, that was the best win of the season. Or maybe we'll fight about it. But I've always said this about bad losses and great wins. They are so easy to forget sometimes. Now, obviously, if you can kind of last the test of time, then obviously you're a great win or you're a terrible loss. But sometimes there's emotion that comes your way in the middle of April and the middle of May where we will walk away from a game and say, that's the best win of the season. And then a week later, you totally forget about it. So that's the point of kind of writing it down and reminding yourself, because there are a few games that will clearly not be the best win of the first half of the year. But in the moment, I thought it was the best win of the first half of the season. But obviously it is a long year and things can change. So ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, let us present game number one in terms of the best wins from the first half of the season. And we actually start with win number one, the very first win of the season back on April 4th, 2024. This is one of those games where I could not score it. I was live on the air with Tiki Barber that day. It was the finale of the Mets' first homestand of the season and the finale of a doubleheader against the Detroit Tigers. Those games, by the way, if you're trying to remember what happened in those games, I would advise you to go to the archives and listen to our last episode, the worst losses of the first half of the year. Because believe it or not, game one of that series against Detroit on a Monday night, game two of that series, I think on a Thursday afternoon because there were a couple of rainouts, those were the first two horrible losses of the 2024 season. The Mets were sitting with a record of 0-5. They had just lost the first game of the doubleheader to the Detroit Tigers, in which they blew a 3-run lead, and now they were facing their early rock bottom moment of the season. Gary Cohen was even quoted as saying, "There's nobody in the ballpark. The Mets are being no hit. They haven't won a game yet. Can it get any worse than this?" Now, we can all discuss, did it ever get worse than this? Probably. I think the Dodgers series a few months later may have been worse than this. But in this moment, in front of an announced attendance of 15,000 people, which I got to tell you has to be one of the smallest crowds in the history of Citi Field, the Mets were being no hit by Matt Manning. They had no hits in this game. They did draw a bunch of walks, so they did have opportunities. They were losing 1-0, and it did appear like they were actually going to get no hit. That's the way it looked. I was on the air for most of this game, and I was fearful of, wow, we're going to start 0-6, and we're going to be no hit. Tyler Holton was on the mound for the Detroit Tigers starting the bottom of the eighth inning with the Mets trailing 1-0, and Harrison Bader at least took us off the hook in terms of the embarrassment by singling to left field. I thought in that moment, all right, this is going to be the game that turns our season around. Harrison Bader's on. They bunted right after that with Zach Short, and the Mets are set up. Nimmo's coming up. Lindor's coming up. Here we go. The Mets are going to tie the game. They're going to take the lead. This is the game that sparks their season. Brandon Nimmo flied out. Francisco Lindor struck out. And the Mets were destined to start 0-6. They did get off the snide by not being no hit, but they went into the bottom of the ninth inning down 1-0. You have probably heard people say that Pete Alonso never gets a clutch hit. And while this season has not been Pete's best year, and he certainly hasn't had his clutchest season ever, I would argue that one of the clutchest hits of the year came off the bat of Pete Alonso, and it came down 1-0, bottom of the ninth inning. The Mets are staring down the barrel of an 0-6 start. And then Pete Alonso said, no.
Have not scored a run, and they have had one hit. The 0-1 on the way. Swinging a high fly ball, left center field, into the gap, pretty deep, back near the wall. It's gone! Pete Alonso ties it. He leads off the bottom of the ninth inning with a line drive home run over the wall to the right of the 370 mark. On a day when the Mets were starved and famished offensively, Alonso breaks through and ties this game 1-1 to begin the bottom of the ninth inning.
Starved and famished. The great Howie Rose with a perfect call to describe that Pete Alonso home run. I remember where I was. I actually stayed at the FAN studios. We had just signed off because it was right around 6:30. So I hung around to watch the rest of the game because, it's 1-0. It's the eighth inning. I didn't want to listen in the car. I wanted to watch it. And when Pete hit that home run, I actually ran into the studio. Tommy Lugauer was on before he was positive Tommy because he wasn't really paying attention to the Mets as much. And I ran in and we screamed together. Actually, he was paying attention because he seemed pumped up. Pete hit the home run. It was a sigh of relief. Right after that, Brett Beatty drew a walk. Starling Marte laid down a bunt. And then Tyrone Taylor was the hero, handing the Mets the first win of the season.
3-2. Here's the payoff pitch. Breaking ball line towards third. Over the glove of the third baseman McKinstry. Down the left field line. Around third, digging for the plate is Beatty. He will score without a throw. Put it in the books. 3-2.
Yes, put it in the damn books. He could have added a damn. That was a very, very important win. It reminded me a little bit of how the Mets started 0-5 in 2005. I think I've mentioned this before on the Rico. And they won a really good game against Atlanta, wrapping up that opening road trip of the season. It was John Smoltz against Pedro Martinez. They won that game, and then the Mets turned their season around. That's exactly what the Mets did. The Mets have had a couple of start and stops this season. They got off to the terrible start 0-5. They win that game dramatically. And then the Mets started playing really good baseball to the point where they got above 500 and they erased the 0-5 start. I mean, clearly the Mets erased it. They got above 500. They started playing well. And I think you could look back at that win on April 4th as certainly the catalyst for it. So huge win, big win, helped turn the season around very, very early. A few weeks later, and this is also a decent measurement of how big a win was, it caused Hoff and I at 12:30 at night, 1 o'clock in the morning on a Friday into a Saturday to both text each other and say, we got to do an emergency Rico. This is an instant reaction kind of game. And that was April 19th, a Friday night against the Los Angeles Dodgers. The Mets were 10-8 at the time. So remember, they start the year 0-5. Now they're 10-8. I mean, do the math. They were playing really, really good baseball. And they had themselves their first real test of the season against the Los Angeles Dodgers. And they were actually facing Yoshinobu Yamamoto on that Friday night. And again, you could go back in the archives and hear the pure joy that we had after we did a Rico from this game. But the Mets built a 4-0 lead against Yamamoto. DJ Stewart hit a home run, which was crazy. He also had a sacrifice fly 1 inning later. Harrison Bader had a couple of hits. And the Mets really touched up Yoshinobu Yamamoto, building up a 4-0 lead. But Sean Manaea and Reed Garrett would promptly blow the lead. They did. And it was certainly not helped out by horrible defense by guess who? Joey Wendell. That seems to be kind of like a common denominator from the first month or two of the season. Joey Wendell played crappy defense. So the Mets had a 4-0 lead. They blew a 4-0 lead. And then Francisco Lindor, who had gotten off to an awful start, and his awful start wasn't necessarily going to end with this, came up and had one of those really clutch moments. He did this.
3-2 to Lindor, swung on, drilled, right center field towards the gap. Pages on the run. He'll turn and just watch this one fly. A 2-run go-ahead home run for Francisco Lindor. His second of the season, and the Mets are on top 6-4 in the 7th inning.
It felt so big because the Mets had just blown a 4-run lead against the Dodgers, and I think anybody staying up late on a Friday night to watch West Coast baseball probably had this sinking feeling in their stomach after the Dodgers did tie the game. Chris Taylor, who at the time was hitting like 0-27, got a 2-run single off of Reed Garrett, and that's what tied the game up. So Lindor's home run felt incredibly clutch. The Mets added to it by scoring 2 more runs in the 8th inning with a Starling Marte 2-run single. And then, this is going to sound really foreign, they got a great bullpen effort by Adam Ottavino and even Jake Diekman, who made things sort of exciting in the 9th inning by putting a couple of guys on base. But the Met bullpen settled in. The Mets scored runs late, and it felt like a really impressive, fun victory. Now, there was a negative to this game that should not be ignored, and maybe this brings it down the rankings when we decide best win of the season. and that is the fact that Francisco Alvarez got hurt in this game. And what I feel bad about is when we did that emergency instant reaction, Rico, we talked about the concern for Alvarez, but I don't think either one of us could understand the magnitude of that injury. And, now that we've got the foresight of what ended up happening, the Mets won the next day against the Dodgers. It was another really good victory. And then really the game after that is what started the demise that lasted over a month. And you could certainly argue that Francisco Alvarez not being around was a big part of it. So I do have to admit, as good as that win was, and it was a really fun win, beating the Dodgers and beating Yoshinobu Yamamoto, the Francisco Alvarez injury turned out to be a really big negative. And it also turned out to be the beginning of the end, or at least we thought it was the beginning of the end, because the Mets would start to struggle. Now, in the midst of their struggles, because they really started playing crappy baseball for over a month, there are some good wins mixed in that I thought, you heard me say it, that I believed was going to help turn around their season. And they all seem to happen in salvage situations. Let's start with April 28th, 2024, Sunday afternoon at Citi Field against the St. Louis Cardinals. The Mets had lost the first two games of this series to St. Louis. And I was sitting there in really bougie seats that day with my wife. It was the all-you-could-eat, all-you-could-drink seats. We decided to have a nice date afternoon on a Sunday afternoon. The Mets were tied 1-1 in this game. They got great pitching out of Jose Quintana. This was the game in which Carlos Mendoza allowed Quintana to talk himself into staying in the game. He got into, I guess he never really got into trouble. I think the matchups were bad. That's what it was. Wilson Contreras came up with 2 outs in the 8th inning. It seemed like a perfect opportunity to take Quintana out, and Quintana kept his way by staying into the game, and he finished incredibly strong, pitching the 8 innings and allowing 1 run. The problem was the Met offense did nothing. The Met offense was stymied. Francisco Lindor hit a home run in the 6th inning, and that was the only offense they had. They did have a few opportunities. The 8th inning, they had 2 on and nobody out. DJ Stewart grounded out. Tyrone Taylor grounded out. Jeff McNeil grounded out. So the game remained 1-1. Edwin Diaz came in and pitched a very good 9th inning, and Reed Garrett, kind of in the midst of his dominant start, had a really impressive 10th inning and got through the 10th inning despite the Manfred Mann runner being on second base. The Mets then had a chance to win the game in the bottom of the 10th inning, and they failed. Francisco Lindor flied out to right field, and after Pete Alonso was intentionally walked, DJ Stewart, the immortal DJ Stewart, grounded into a 4-6-3 double play. And it was a sinking feeling of, my God, you allowed them, or you didn't allow them to score a run in the top of the 10th inning. You're in your own building. You got a runner on second, nobody out in the heart of the order coming up. How do you not win this game? Now, what we have later found out is that the Mets can't win extra inning games at home. A little factoid that we'll get into a little bit later on. Top of the 11th inning, second pitch of the inning, Brendan Donovan hits an RBI single. The Mets are fortunate to get through that inning after that unscathed, including turning an odd double play. So the Mets are now down a run going into the bottom of the 11th inning. You guys remember this one? Hoff remembers this one because his boy was the hero. And our boys were the heroes because there were multiple people that were heroes. So Matthew Liberatore is pitching his 3rd inning of work, trying to shut down the Mets because the Cardinals have used their bullpen a lot over the weekend. And he gets the first 2 outs. He gets Tyrone Taylor out. Jeff McNeil lines right back to the pitcher. And the Mets are set up with a runner on third base and 2 outs. They are down to their final out. They are about to get swept by the St. Louis Cardinals, and they're about to drop a game under 500. The count is 0-2 on Harrison Bader. And Harrison Bader, who has had a really clutch year this year, probably had his most clutched moment right here.
0-2 to Bader. Swinging a liner over second, base hit center field. The Mets have tied the game on their first hit with men in scoring position today. They had been 0 for 15 until Harrison Bader delivers a 2-out single to center. We're all even again. It is 2-2.
Imagine that, 0 for 15 with runners in scoring position. They had that opportunity in the 10th. They couldn't score. Of course, another opportunity in the 11th with the Manfred Man. They're about to be shut down again on an 0-2 pitch. Harrison Bader delivers that RBI single. The following hitter was Mark Vientos, who had pinch hit earlier in the game for Brett Beatty. This is when Vientos first got called up. At this moment, he is 1 for 2 as a New York Met in 2024. He gets a base hit when he pinch hits in the ninth. So now he's 2 for 3. And now he's set to have his 4th at-bat of the 2024 season. And he does it behind in the count in a tie game in the bottom of the 11th inning. And little did we know that where he hit the ball and the outcome of this at-bat would be a sign of things to come.
1-2 pitch. Vientos hits it high in the air, right center, pretty deep. Ciani going back onto the track, at the wall, he jumps, it is gone! A game-winning home run for Mark Vientos. Put it in the books. The Mets have defeated the Cardinals here in the bottom of the 11th by a score of 4-2, and they are waiting to pounce on Mark Vientos at home plate as he flings his batting helmet back. 1-2.
The crazy part is, as much as we look at it now and say, yeah, Mark Vientos hitting a home run to center field, he's been doing that all year. Even that little run that Mark went on didn't solidify himself as an everyday player. It's crazy to think about. We want to compliment David Stearns, and there's a lot to compliment on him, but their handling of Mark Vientos, even though now it's worked out, was very slow. If you go back to spring training, when J.D. Martinez wasn't ready to be called up, I thought Vientos should have started the year as the primary DH. They didn't do it. When they finally called him up in late April and he went on a mini tear, he still didn't get that full opportunity. It took a little bit more time for Mark Vientos to really grab that opportunity. But this was an example of a game in late April in which I said on the Rico, and I certainly remember saying it, hey, maybe this is the win that turns them around. Maybe this is the win that sparks the team. It didn't happen. And 2 weeks later, we were in the exact same situation. It was May 12th, 2024, the finale of a 3-game series against Atlanta. The Mets lost the Friday night game. They nearly got no hit on the Saturday game. They were about to get no hit. And in this Sunday game, a Sunday night game, the Mets are playing a very close game. Luis Severino pitches into the 6th inning. Bryce Elder pitches reasonably well. Braves take an early 1-0 lead. Mets tied on a Pete Alonso RBI single 1-1. Braves take the lead in the 6th inning on an RBI single by Marcell Ozuna. They instantly tie the game back up on an RBI double by Pete Alonso. Weird to hear Pete Alonso doing things. I was told he's not clutch. And then in the 8th inning of this game, we saw the New York Met bullpen implode. That sounds crazy. Adam Ottavino came in, walks the leadoff hitter, lets him steal second, and gives up an RBI single to that pain-in-the-ass Marcell Ozuna. But then Jake Diekman came into the game very quietly, kept it where it was. Kept it with the Mets trailing 3-2. Edwin Diaz pitched the 9th inning and kept it where it was. The Mets had a great opportunity to score a little bit before that. They had a few opportunities in this game they failed on, but they were down by a run. And after going down 1-2-3 in the 8th inning, the 9th inning came around. The Mets are on the verge of being swept by Atlanta. They're down 3-2. They're 18-20 on the season. So not only are they about to be swept by Atlanta, they're about to drop 3 games under 500. Jeff McNeil led off the bottom of the 9th inning against A.J. Minter by surprising him by laying down a bunt single. Tomas Nido then laid down a bunt of his own. I was totally great with that. And then Brandon Nimmo, who had come into the game a little bit earlier, after he pinch ran for DJ Stewart, came up to the plate. Brandon Nimmo had left the Saturday game because of, I think it was, I'm trying to remember what the injury was. I don't know if it wasn't feeling well, but there was some kind of injury that took him out of the Saturday game. And then he didn't start this Sunday night game. He actually came into the game late when he pinch ran for DJ Stewart. So imagine Brandon Nimmo is coming up to the plate with the Mets down by a run with 1 out in the 9th inning, and he actually wasn't supposed to be there. And I'll tell you after why my son Jed, who was with me, got very mad at me. But why don't you first hear what Brandon Nimmo did to send us home happy?
And a drive, well hit right center. Back goes Harris onto the track. It's gone! Unbelievable! Brandon Nimmo, who was not supposed to even swing a bat today, has won the game for the Mets. A 2-run homer in the bottom of the 9th inning. They have defeated the Braves 4-3. Nimmo pounces on home plate. The Mets pounce on Nimmo, trying to be respectful and protective of his sore side, but you never know it. A game-winning homer by Brandon Nimmo. Put it in the books. Swinging.
Wow. That's as excited as how he was in any of the calls we've played. And you can understand why. When you factor in, yes, game-winning 2-run home run, bottom of the 9th inning, that's awesome. But then he reminded us it was his sore side that took Brandon Nimmo out of the Saturday game and kept him from starting the Sunday game. So it was another game in which the Mets salvage the finale of a series, and we're pumped up because of how dramatic it was. But is it really going to turn their season around? Spoiler alert, it did not. Now, on a personal note, why was my son upset with me? And also, after he was no longer upset with me, he asked about Pete Hoffman's son. So that's basically what happened. Why he was mad is that I've learned this about Jet. I've learned this watching professional wrestling with him. I've learned this going to Met games with him and net games with him. He likes to stay very even-keeled. Like Cody Rhodes comes out, he just watches. He doesn't mark out, as some people say. Same thing at baseball games. He's digesting it, but he's not a big cheerer or crazy actor when games are going on. When Brandon Nimmo hit the home run, Dad got excited. I'll be the first to tell you, I got pumped up. And as he later informed me, I scared him. He did not like how excited I got. And it led to a longer conversation, which is, okay, I respect that. What about everybody else? Like, were you bothered by the 38,000 other people that were all excited? And he said, no, you're not my dad. I said, okay, that's fair. I said, so what would you like me to do? Because I was pumped up that the guy hit a home run. He's like, oh, you should get excited, but not that excited. So it was a long-form discussion that I later had to I got a second chance because he was with me for the JT Martinez walk-off, which we'll get to. So I had to, I need to channel my excitement. But then the next thing he brought up was Pete Hoffman's son, who he had met one time, and said, is he excited? And I was like, why are you asking me about Hoff's son? Like, well, what do you mean? Why is he excited? He's like, he's a Brandon Nimmo fan. I said, that's right. So that led me to say, Hoff, is your son pumped up that Brandon Nimmo hit a walk-off?
He was sleeping that night because it was a Sunday night game. He went to bed a little early, but when I told him the next morning, he fist pumped. So he was because they were hanging at the Friday game. We went to the Friday game.
That's
together.
right. It was 2 days. You know what? It all makes sense now. 2 days earlier, we went to the Friday night game. And yes, that was one thing that Jet discovered about him. Oh, he's a big Brandon Nimmo guy. So when Brandon Nimmo hits the walk-off, he did want to know, was he excited? And yes, the next morning, he was pumped up.
Now, I have a question for you. If when you get excited, Jet kind of got a little frazzled. What happens when you are upset? Does he say the same thing to you? Do you curse at all? Do you get excited?
No, he actually doesn't get bothered by that for whatever reason. And I noticed it a couple of times. And that now I finally have fixed it because I respect him. If that's scaring the crap out of him, I don't want to scare him. He explained that when I get that excited, it kind of scares him a little bit. And I'm like, you got nothing to be scared about. Like, and I'm not even that crazy, to be honest with you. I think if I had to give you like an example of how I probably act, it was like this. Get up, get out of here. Yeah, we won. Yeah. Like that. And freaked him out. But I was so lucky because about 3 games later on this list, we got another chance at it. I was able to make him proud. Actually, no, I screwed that one up too. More on that in a second. The next game in these great Met victories, I think we're up to win number 5, was May 16th against the Philadelphia Phillies. The Mets at this point have dropped 4 games under 500. They had just lost. They had split 2 games against the Philadelphia Phillies, with one of them being on the list of bad losses. Now they go to Philadelphia after playing the 2 at Citi Field. They lose the first game. They get blown out late. Joey Lucchesi gave up a bunch of runs. Grant Hartwig gave up a bunch of runs. They lost 10-5. And now they're playing the finale of this 2-game series. And this was a wild, wild game that, again, was the final game of a stretch that felt like they survived by winning a game and had us trying to convince ourselves, oh, this is the win that turns their season around. They built an early 2-0 lead against the Philadelphia Phillies with Jose Quintana on the mound. They come back and they tie the game in the 6th inning. They rally against Quintana and Reed Garrett in the bullpen. They tie the game up at 2. They take the lead in the 7th on an RBI double by Kyle Schwarber, and they go up 3-2. Then in the 8th inning, they take advantage of a bad error by Edmundo Sosa, a wild pitch, and an RBI single by Harrison Bader, and they come back and they take the lead. So now the Mets have a 1-run lead going into the bottom of the 8th inning. They get a scoreless inning out of Adam Ottavino. They do nothing in the ninth inning, and Edwin Diaz is on to save this game. Edwin Diaz had blown a game a few days earlier. He gives up a leadoff walk to Brandon Marsh. It was a 10-pitch at-bat. He then throws a wild pitch that allows Marsh to go to second, gets a huge strikeout of Cody Clemens, and then Bryson Stott, who is such a pain in the ass, hits an RBI single to tie the game in the ninth inning. And to Diaz's credit, he's able to get through the ninth inning after the Phillies tie it up. The Mets can't score with the Manfred man on second in the 10th inning. In the bottom of the 10th inning, they get great work by Jorge Lopez, who walked Bryce Harper immediately, so it was 2-1 and nobody out, and then got Alec Boehm to ground into a double play and got through the 10th inning, even though off the bat, Nick Castellanos looked like he hit a ball that was going to end it. In the top of the 11th inning, they get an RBI single out of J.D. Martinez, and they get the second run, of course, on a wild pitch with 2 outs, which is kind of how the Mets scored a lot of runs when they were sucking in the middle of May. And they took a 2-run lead. And yes, Jake Diekman was given the opportunity to try to protect the lead. He gets the first out. He gives up an infield hit. He gives up a walk. He gets an RBI ground out against Bryson Stott. And then shockingly, up by a run with the tying run on third base, with the winning run on second base, he strikes out Kyle Schwarber. And that's the highlight we pulled. Him shockingly striking out Kyle Schwarber. Take a listen.
Here's the 1-2 pitch. Swung on and missed, strike 3. Put it in the books. Diekman gets him with a breaking ball, and the Mets hold on. They survive as they have taken the final game of this 4-game series from the Phillies. Here's the one.
See, it's a salvage spot. I mean, that's really what it was, and I think survive was probably the best way to describe it. But it's up there because I think at that time, losing all 4 to the Phillies, and it was just like the season was going to hell in a handbasket. And so those are the kinds of wins that in the moment you said to yourself, well, maybe that's the game that's going to turn the season around. And yeah, I know I said this game after game after game. Well, guess what? Eventually we were right. It took a while, but we were right. In fact, our next great win actually occurs almost a month later because there really weren't a lot of great wins after that. In fact, the Mets went through their tailspin where they hit rock bottom. Again, go back to the archives of our past episode of worst losses. You'll hear a few more, including what happened in that series against the LA Dodgers, blowing a game against the Giants. Things obviously got worse. We weren't quite sure the Mets were turning their season around because innocently, all they had done was sweep the Washington Nationals, which was great, but even bad teams can sweep teams. Now we're in London. The Mets are playing the Philadelphia Phillies in London. I was fortunate enough to be out there. They lose the first game. What else is new? Like, how can anybody be surprised? And now we're watching the second game. At the time, the Mets are 9 games under 500. So again, think about where they are mathematically. They have not escaped their doldrums, despite the fact that now maybe we can look back and see the Arizona series and the Washington series as the turnaround. The players only meeting, Jorge Lopez and all that. Where we are is watching Mets Phillies in London. You guys are mostly watching it at 10 a.m. because this was the Sunday game that started very early. For me out in London, it was a 3 o'clock start. And what happens? Immediately, before my ass is comfortable in the seats at London Stadium, the Phillies take a 1-0 lead against Jose Quintana. The Met bats are doing nothing against Taijuan Walker. They're making him look great. In the 4th inning, they get back-to-back hits from Edmundo Sosa and Whit Merrifield, and now we're staring at a 3-0 game with Taijuan Walker absolutely cruising. And then a pulse. With 2 outs and a runner on first, Pete Alonso draws a walk. Brandon Nimmo hits an RBI double, and J.D. Martinez delivers the shocking 2-run single that ties the game up at 3. It's like, whoa, where the hell did this come from? Now, it's only tied. Who knows what's going to happen next? Well, guess what happens next? Of all people, David Dahl, as a pinch hitter in the 7th inning, hits a home run. And he does it against Dednel Nunez, who had done such a really good job because at that point he had already retired 5 guys, had gotten 5 outs, but it was one batter too long. And with Jake Diekman warming up in the bullpen, there was always that option of going lefty-lefty once Dahl was announced. Mendy didn't do it, And Dednell Nunez, who's made very few mistakes, gives up a home run to David Dahl. Underrated in this game was the fact that the Mets were able to escape that 7th inning, even though there were 2 on and 2 out with Nicholas Castellanos coming up. But Reed Garrett got a big strikeout. The Mets went down meekly in the 8th inning, and they went down into the 9th inning, trailing by a run. It's over. We're about to be swept in London. Like, great. I saw Big Ben. Me and my wife had a great time. We're about to get swept by the Philadelphia Phillies. Jose Alvarado, though, did not agree. He wanted things to be a little interesting. So he walked Tyrone Taylor to start the bottom of the 9th inning. And Jeff McNeil, against the lefty, got a base hit. And this was on the heels of McNeil sitting for a while, if memory serves correct. Then they get themselves a little infield single from the engine himself, Jose Iglesias. And we have ourselves a tie game. Great. The Mets have come back. This is like a miracle. But now they have to take the lead. Luis Torrens draws a walk. Lindor strikes out in a big spot. Pete Alonso gets hit by a pitch. And then they add another run on a pass ball. It was the most unimpressive 9th inning rally you'll ever see. But hey, how can we complain? The Mets have now somehow built a 6-4 lead going into the bottom of the 9th inning with the immortal Drew Smith coming in to save the game. Actually, Reed Garrett stayed on to try to save the game in the 9th inning. There's no Edwin Diaz. He's not around. Reed Garrett gives up a leadoff hit. He gets a big out against Kyle Schwarber, and then on an 0-2 pitch, he hits JT Realmuto. 2-run game, 2 on, 1 out. Here's Bryce Harper against Drew Smith, who now comes into the game. First pitch base hit, and the bases are loaded. Up by 2, bases loaded, 1 out. We're screwed. I mean, there's nobody who thought the Mets were winning this game. Alec Boehm draws a walk. It's now a 1-run game. The Phillies are a base hit away from winning it. My confidence rating at this point is 0.01%. By the way, as I go through this game, I'm starting to think this is going to be the winner. But we'll go through it later. Bases loaded. 1 out. The crappy Drew Smith on the mound. And then we witnessed a play that none of us has ever seen before.
The 0-2. Broken back grounder right in front of the plate. Torrens picks the ball up, steps on first, steps on the plate, throws to first. End time, a double play. Unbelievable. The Mets win the game, and Torrens is hurt. Drew Smith helps him to his feet. It is a 2 unassisted 3 double play. The Mets win 6-5.
Crazy. I mean, and as I'm watching this play develop, and I was sitting in the upper level behind home plate, my typical seat, all I'm thinking as that ball is in front of home plate is just touch home. Like, I am not even contemplating a double play. It is merely pick up the baseball, touch home plate, and we'll deal with Edmundo Sosa with the bases loaded. And we'll see what happens. So Torrens does it. I'm very excited about that. And then I see him make the throw. And as the throw's being made, the other thought is, oh my God, if this is a bad throw, we're going to lose. That ball goes up the first base line. 2 runs are going to score. And it turned out to be a good enough throw. Pete made the pick. And a real shocking ending to that victory. It improved the Mets to 8 games under 500. And it kind of relaxed us a little bit. Almost made us think, okay, they got the split against the Phillies. They had just swept the Nationals. They got a lot of work to do at 8 games under 500, but maybe the Mets are turning their season around. And that jumps us to just 4 days later. They lost this lifeless first game to the Marlins on the homestand. A homestand where the Mets, to me, really needed to do their work. They lose the first game of the series to Miami. They come back and they win the second game 10-4. And now they're facing the rubber game of this 3-game series on a Thursday night against the crappy Miami Marlins. They're losing 2-0. Luis Severino pitched really well until he gave up a home run to Jake Berger in the 7th. And that was it. But the Mets just weren't hitting. And then Drew Smith comes in and gives up a home run to Jazz Chisholm. The Mets fight back. They score a run in the bottom of the 7th inning, but they should have scored more. They were set up with the bases loaded and nobody out, and they only score 1 run. And they're losing 2-1. Edwin Diaz had come into this game, and Edwin Diaz had just been activated. So keep that in mind. Diaz is making his return. He pitches a clean 9th inning to keep this game 2-1 going into the bottom of the ninth inning. Now I'm thinking maybe this is the best win of the season because they're still 8 games under 500. They can't lose a home series to the Miami Marlins. I'm with Jet again. I'm not even thinking about a walk-off. I'm not even thinking, boy, I better remain calm because sometimes the walk-offs come out of nowhere. Francisco Lindor leadoff walk. Nimmo strikes out. Lindor steals second. I'm really thinking JD tied this game. And off the bat, I was confident it was going to tie the game. What I didn't know is this bat off ball from JD or ball off bat from JD Martinez wasn't going to tie the game. It was going to win the game.
1 out, last of the ninth. 2-1 Marlins. Lindor bouncing around. Here's the 3-1 pitch. Swing and a drive to right center. It's deep. It's going to win it. Back by the wall. It's gone. Put it in the books. J.D. Martinez with a game-winning 2-run opposite field home run. He hit it just to the left of the Marlins bullpen beyond the 380 mark. And the Mets have come back to win it in the bottom of the ninth inning, 3-2, as Martinez is pounded on at home plate.
Here's the problem. The only negative as I'm hearing that call is that I got too excited again. I did not solve the issue that I was trying to fix with my oldest son. I got way too excited about the J.D. Martinez home run. Jet was very upset with me, and it actually led to an interaction with the guy sitting behind me as we were leaving, in which he says, "Is your son okay? It seems like he's upset." And I said, "It's a long story. He's upset, but he's okay." And as we were walking down the ramp, I said, "Listen, Jen, I'm sorry. I got too excited again. My apologies." And then he kind of morphed into, "That was so cool. Wow, I got to see another walk-off home run." Now, I have since fixed those mistakes. I have since fixed that I can't get too excited. But sometimes these walk-offs come out of nowhere. And this was a big one. Again, I don't know what we thought at the time, cutting the deficit to 7 games under 500, but losing a series at home to the Miami Marlins would have been brutal. And I think it would have wiped away the good feeling from what they accomplished by getting that split against the Philadelphia Phillies in London. So it was a really important victory. It was a series win. And Edwin Diaz, I think, pitching that ninth inning was really, really important. And little did I know that I think the next night, and this is one of those rare ones, like most of the bad losses are games that they blew. And most of the great wins are the games where they came back. I mean, you've heard that throughout almost every game. I'm about to give you a game that's on this list as one of the best wins of the year, and it wasn't a comeback. It was the very next night. Very next night. Mets win the series against the Miami Marlins. Now they're taking on the San Diego Padres. Big series considering where the Padres are in the standings. They went into that series with 7 more wins than the Mets and 2 fewer losses. It was Sean Manaea against Matt Waldron, the knuckleballer. And the game was actually delayed by a little over an hour because of rain. The Mets took an early 2-0 lead on a 2-run double by J.D. Martinez. He was clearly red hot. And Sean Manaea gave up his 1 run that he did when Jackson Merrill hit a home run. They got 5+ out of Sean Manaea. And then the New York Met bullpen, I know this sounds weird to think about, the Met bullpen went to work. And they actually protected that 2-1 lead. Adam Ottavino got 5 outs. Jake Diekman got 1 big out. And that was, of course, after putting 2 guys on base with a walk and a hit batsman. Sean Reed Foley pitched a clean 8th inning, protecting a 1-run lead. And then it was the moment of truth. And this is why, to me, this game is up there, despite it not being any kind of crazy comeback. Edwin Diaz was pitching in back-to-back days. He had just been activated from the injured list and was looking to save a game, which he has not done often. And he was tested early because right off the top, he comes into a 1-run game and gives up a leadoff base hit to Jurickson Profar right off the gate. It was a good long at-bat. It was an 8-pitch at-bat, gives up a hit. And then the pinch runner steals second base. So right off the top, 1-run lead, runner on second, nobody out. Are you kidding me? Is Edwin Diaz going to blow this game? He strikes out Manny Machado. He gets bailed out on a great defensive play by Jeff McNeil at second. And then with the tying run on third base and 2 outs, he stared into the eyes of Drake Cronenworth.
Mets 2, the Padres 1, tying run at third, 2 out of the ninth, 3-2 to Cronenworth. Here's the pitch. Swung on and missed, strike 3, put it in the books. Edwin Diaz buries a back foot slider, picks up the save, and the Mets have taken the opener of this 3-game series from the San Diego Padres.
I think we thought about it at the time, and I think we still feel this way despite maybe our lack of confidence in Edwin Diaz. The Mets need Edwin Diaz if they are going to make the playoffs. They need him in the second half of the year, and I think those back-to-back performances, keeping the game a one-run game against the Marlins on a Thursday and then getting his first save in a while on a Friday, were incredibly important. Now the Mets were on fire. They were playing really, really good baseball. They went on to sweep the San Diego Padres, and our next great win came 4 days later, June 18th, against the Texas Rangers on a Tuesday night. The Mets at this point have now won 6 in a row. They're hot. There's no denying it. They still have a lot of work to do because they're 3 games under 500. They still have a lot of work to do in terms of getting into a playoff spot, but here they are playing great baseball. That's the good news. The bad news is it looked like the Met winning streak was about to end. They took an early 1-0 lead on a Vientos home run. The Rangers came back and tied it against Luis Severino. And then in the 5th inning, after the Mets had retaken the lead, they exploded, the Rangers did, against Luis Severino. First 2 guys got on base, gave up an RBI single to Corey Seager, gave up a 3-run bomb to Josh Smith. Just a quick note about Josh Smith. This is for something you can use with friends. The Texas Rangers acquired Josh Smith, who's had a very good offensive season, for Joey Gallo from the Yankees. I just want to point that out. Then Severino gives up a home run to Wyatt Langford, and all of a sudden the Mets are trailing 6-2. And I think we all just kind of figure, all right, they've won 6 in a row. I mean, they're not going to win every single day. It's one of those losses it's just going to happen. But then a 6-2 game became 6-3. Brandon Nimmo hit a home run. Then in the 7th inning, the Mets had a great opportunity. They had bases loaded, 1 out. And it was actually a really big disappointment because they only got 1 run. Francisco Lindor grounded into what should have been a double play, but there was a defensive miscue. The Mets didn't take advantage of it because Brandon Nimmo struck out, and it's a 6-3 game. By the way, this entire time, give Severino credit. He actually pitched another inning and a third and kept this game close. Jake Diekman got some big outs. Reed Garrett got some big outs. So the Mets were maintaining this and keeping this thing close. 8th inning. Again, Mets are given a great opportunity to get a 2-run double by Francisco Alvarez that all of a sudden helps the Mets come back and tie the game. And that Francisco Alvarez double, I'm sorry, I had a mental lap for a second because I was like, is that what tied the game? It did. They were down by 2 runs in the 8th inning, and Francisco Alvarez with 2 outs in that inning had a tremendous at-bat, tremendous battle against David Robertson, who had come in an inning earlier, and he hit this majestic line drive up the alley that helped them tie the game. So from 6-1 down, the Mets come back, or 6-2 down. They come back. They tie the game up at 6. The Met bullpen keeps it close by allowing nothing in the 8th inning. And then with a little bit of help from catcher's interference, they get a clutch RBI double by Pete Alonso, who got the game-winning hit. Again, Pete Alonso doesn't get big hits. Well, he had that one, gave the Mets the lead, and Edwin Diaz comes in, saves the game, and the Mets erase a 6-2 deficit. They come back. They beat the Rangers 7-6, and now they have a 7-game winning streak. Here we go. We're feeling good. That was a great victory.
You blew past every single highlight. You got it so excited about that.
Oh my God, you're right. We had 2 highlights, right? We had the Alvarez game. Oh my God. I'm sorry. This game excited me so much I forgot all of them. You know what, Pete? Do me a favor. Why don't you set up each highlight for all of us and I'll get all excited all over again, okay?
All right. So listen. So it's 6-3 or 6-4 at this point in time.
At this point, 6-4 in the 8th inning when Alvarez came up.
Francisco Alvarez comes up and does something like this.
Set. Runners about to break. There they go. Payoff pitch. Hit in the air, left center field. Tavares on the run, not going to get it. It hits and drives to the wall. 2 runs will score. Alvarez ties the game. A 2-run double to the gap in left center. It is 6-6 in the 8th.
Yes.
And then you think that's it for this team. You think there's no more fight left. But the top of the ninth, Pete Alonso comes up with a clutch double.
He cracks one on the ground. Diving attempt by Duran, but it's Payam down the left field line. Nimmo scores. Martinez to third. Pete Alonso gives the Mets the lead. He yanks one down the third base line. Doubles in a run. 7-6 Mets in the 9th.
And then finally, our boy, Edwin Diaz, shuts down the freaking former World Series champions, Texas Rangers.
Hit high in the air. Lazy fly to left. Nimmo coming in. Settles under it. Makes the catch. Oh, the Mets come from behind tonight. They were down 6-2. They win the game 7-6. Edwin Diaz closes it out in the ninth. The Mets keep this thing alive. 7 straight wins.
7 straight wins. Thank you, Pete. I'm glad that you were able to enjoy those highlights. I got very excited.
I'm like, what the hell are you doing, dude? I have a job here. Take it away
I know.
from me.
Meanwhile, those are the first 9 games that we've gone through. I was doing well with all of them. It was that one got me all worked up. One game that was an honorable mention that did not make the cut of 10 best wins of the year was that Sunday night game against the Chicago Cubs. Rubber game of the 3-game series, tiebreaker on the line. They won the series against Chicago. Edwin Diaz got ejected and suspended that night on Sunday Night Baseball. It was a nice victory. It does not make the cut, but this one does. And this is the 10th and final first half win that made the cut on 10 best wins of the first half of the year. And, you know, the geek in me, the guy that loves great pitching and loves low-scoring games, may look back at this July 7th game against the Pittsburgh Pirates, and I may just say it's the best game of the season. It was 0-0 going into the 8th inning. Sean Manaea delivered 6 scoreless innings through 89 pitches, and Mendy said, "Thank you for your time." Luis Ortiz of the Pittsburgh Pirates threw 6 scoreless innings before the Pirates went to their bullpen. And in the top of the 8th inning of this game, in a 0-0 game, the Mets took the lead on an RBI double by Brandon Nimmo. Mets are up 1-0. We're all feeling really, really good. Dednel Nunez is now pitching the bottom of the 8th inning, and he gets himself into trouble. He gives up a leadoff hit, gets a bunt strikeout against Michael Taylor, gives up a hit to Andrew McCutchen, and then he strikes out Brian Reynolds. Very impressive at-bat. There was a slider on 3-2 and got the Pirates' best hitter out. And then Mendy did something I did not like. He went to Edwin Diaz. And it's not even a knock on Diaz more than it was I wanted Nunez to finish that inning. And Diaz promptly blows the game. He issues a 4-pitch walk and then gives up a 2-run single to Nick Gonzalez that gives the Pirates the 2-1 lead. The Mets are on the verge of a bad loss. A really bad loss. For all the good the Mets had accomplished during their run, they're about to lose to the Pittsburgh Pirates. They're about to lose 2 out of 3. It is a 4-game series, but it's a Sunday afternoon. And they're about to drop 2 games under 500. And 2 games under 500 doesn't feel right, especially with all the work this Met team did. So now in the 9th inning, they're trying to make a comeback against Aroldis Chapman. And this is recent, so I do remember saying this. I don't believe Chapman imploded. I believe the Mets put together some of the greatest at-bats you'll ever see. And it started with Francisco Alvarez, who drew a walk. And it continued with Harrison Bader getting a single. And then after Vientos and Terren struck out back-to-back, Jose OMG Iglesias gave you an at-bat and a half. An 8-pitch walk in which he pimped the crap out of it after he drew the walk. And it set up this epic encounter. Mets down a run. They're down to their final out. The bases are loaded with 2 outs. And the batter was Francisco Lindor.
Chapman set the 1-1. Line drive left field, falling in. Base hit by Lindor. Gamble scores. Bader rounding third. He scores. The throw is cut off on the way to the plate. The Mets take the lead with their backs against the wall or against Aroldis Chapman. Lindor drives in 2, and the Mets have a 3-2 lead in the 9th.
Such an incredible inning in terms of quality at-bats. I mean, so many quality at-bats against Aroldis Chapman. But the question after Lindor got that hit was, okay, well, what do you do in the 9th inning? And I admit, I didn't want to go back to Edwin Diaz and let him finish the job. But Carlos Mendoza disagreed, and he made me look like an ass, thankfully, because he delivered a 1-2-3 inning and the Mets' 44th win of the season.
Diaz deals the payoff. Sawinski bounces one weakly right side. Iglesias has it up to first. It's in time, and the Mets win a thriller in Pittsburgh.
Yes, they did. So those are the 10 best wins of the year, and I got 2 in my head now as we recap by saying, okay, this is the best Mets win of the first half of the year. I got two that really jump out at me. But before I give you my answer, Pete, who did a marvelous job with all the audio clips until I tried to skip game number 9, in your opinion, after hearing these 10, and obviously if I left one out, certainly let us know, and you always can at thericob@gmail.com. But is there a win that jumps out at you where you say that's the best win of the first half of the season?
I mean, I have two, and I'm really torn on them. I think I'm gonna have to lean towards the JD Martinez home run to make it to walk off. Like, I feel like, by the way, first ever walk off home run by JD for JD Martinez. I mean, think about that. Special moment for him as well. But for the Mets, I think that really signified the beginning of this. That was before Grimace, right? Or right during Grimace?
It was during Grimace. So the Grimace thing occurred, I think, before game 2 of that series. I think it was the day before. Grimace shows up, Mets beat the Marlins 10-4, and then JD hits the home run the next night. So it's right around that same time, yes.
Yeah, I think that's got to be it. The other one would have been the Rangers game to get it 7 in a row. Again, the way they fought back from that. But I just think that that game right there signified how we fought back all season long. All those like salvage games that the Mets had, I mean, without those salvage wins, they wouldn't be where they are right now. So they were significant.
No, it's funny to think about that, but you're right. I mean, like, look, at the end of the day, if you win 90 games, a lot of them matter. They all count the same. It's just how they make you feel sometimes. So I'm with you. I had 2 games that made my final 2. One of them, I'm in lockstep with you, and that's the JD Martinez game. I think that there was a lot on the line. You can't lose a series to the Marlins. The Mets had already lost the series to the Marlins earlier this season, and I do think that losing that game would have kind of sapped the momentum from what they had started to accomplish in sweeping the Nationals and getting the split against the Philadelphia Phillies. So that's definitely a game I'm strongly considering. The other game, and I don't know if I have a bias towards it because I was there, and I'm not sure how everyone felt watching a game at 10 a.m., but that second London game is nuts. I mean, it really is. When you think about how they won it. Now, it was not the most impressive. I remember saying that when we did the Rico live from London, the way they scored the runs in the 9th inning, like, you didn't walk away feeling inspired that the team was going to go on a run, but it was kind of a miracle victory when you think about how they did it. They rallied in the 9th against Alvarado. They were lucky to score the insurance runs and then to end the game on a 2-3 double play. So I think it's that or it's the Marlin game. Those are the two that really jump out at me, but I think I'm going to agree with you. I think the ultimate biggest win of the season was that Thursday night against the Marlins. It's the day after Grimace. It really got the winning streak going. Like, there's a lot of games you can look at as line of demarcations, but that's really the answer because they went out and they won 7 in a row and they were on the verge of losing. And Edwin Diaz came back and it was important how he pitched. They go on and they sweep San Diego. So I'm with you. I think the biggest win or the best win of the first half of the season was that Thursday night against Miami.
I will give you a little credit though for the London game because I do remember they were playing better baseball, and I'm like, damn it, we got to go to freaking London now. Let's at least split the freaking series. At least split it. And at that point in time, up until they made the comeback, they weren't winning crap. They played terrible baseball. So the fact that they came back and won that game, we got back to where we were before we went to London. I felt good. And then trajectory went up from there. So.
And then the takeoff occurred. Your thoughts? You can always email us, thericob@gmail.com, or drop us a voicemail, 725-222-8699. Hopefully you enjoyed some of our all-star break memory lane material. Worst losses of the year, best wins of the year.
And by the way, just real quick, I know the salvaging was one significant thing that I noticed. Harrison Bader had a lot to do with a lot of these highlights too.
No doubt.
It's amazing. We don't really think of him as Mr. Clutch, but he's somebody that's in the mix to bring these comebacks going. So it's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Harrison Bader's had a very good first half of the year. So keep in mind, as the second half of the season begins on Friday night in Miami, start writing them down. Start jotting down the horrible losses and the great wins so it's easy to remember when we're reminiscing in early November and late October. But we do appreciate you listening, downloading, and subscribing. to another edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna Podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.